So Ryan, you ready to go?
Yep, I'm good to
Okay.
go.
All right. So all you gotta do is say next, and I'll hit the next slide.
Cool. So, hi everyone. My name is Ryan Bhangdia. I'm new to the Photographic Society and new to Philly as well. I moved just this past June. So happy to be here and happy to be meeting everyone. I showed a few photos at the salon in October and met quite a few of you, but looking forward to meeting more of you. Um, so all of these five are shot on film with my Hasselblad camera, and they are all shot on Berger Pancro 400 film. It's a French film that's still in production. A cubic grain film. I'd prefer that to the modern T grain emulsions, but it's all developed by myself in Adox Rodinal, or the modern equivalent of that developer. I see I'm one of the younger people here, so I'm sure many of you have a lot more experience than I do with film. I've been shooting film for about 5 years, but I'll talk about these five images a little bit more. So this is an anemone flower. Um, I shot it with my Hasselblad, which I actually have right here. I just got back from a trip in Big Bend, and so I have a lot more pictures. But what I like about this one is the focus on the stamen portion of the flower, and I like the way that the depth of field falls off just behind the stamen cluster and in front of it as well. And I made this at home. These flowers are from a flower CSA that I used to get when I was living in Boston, which is where I was living before Philly. And so this was part of the spring CSA share. And uh, I think this is a really nice picture. I hope you guys do, but this one prints really well in the darkroom. And yeah, I'll get to the next one. This one, same stuff in terms of the technical aspects of the picture, but this is in Guatemala in 2021 in December. And there's a lot of volcanoes in Guatemala, but one of them is relatively inactive. It's called Acatenango, and you can hike it. And so I went on a trip with my father. We had planned for a trip in 2020, but that got canceled because of COVID, of course. But we were able to make it up in 2021, and we hiked this mountain. And across the way, about a mile and a half, 2 miles, is de Fuego. And that volcano erupts very frequently, small eruptions that are more showy than anything, every 10 to 30 minutes. So we camped at the summit and listened to and watched the volcano erupting all evening into the night and into the morning. This was shot with a 180 millimeter lens, which on 6x6 medium format is similar, more similar to a 100 millimeter lens in full frame terms. But I I love that you can see so much detail in the plume of smoke and little bits of rock and fragmentation falling off of the image. And I also, one of the things that I love about uh, Rodinal as a developer is the tonal range that it provides. And so I really liked that I was able to get some decently bright whites in the highlights of the clouds, and also just the labyrinth of tones in the plume of smoke itself. Next. This one I took at the DC Botanic Gardens. It's by far my favorite place in DC, and I like I like the way that this is kind of a repeating image. Like you can see the palm frond in front in focus, but then the one in behind you can also recognize as a palm frond. And I also really like that the palm itself is cropped by the frame of the negative. I think composing landscape images are right up my wheelhouse, and composing macro images of flowers is also something I feel very comfortable with. But the middle distance, which I kind of consider this to be, is always a composition that has kind of eluded me. But I think it really worked in this case, and um, I really like it. Next. This is another flower from the CSA that I was mentioning. Um, it's a ranunculus flower, and I lit this one with a single light, and I was able to light it in such a way that it casts a shadow on its own stem, causing it to almost look as though it's floating. And I think that's a really cool effect. There's no Photoshop or alteration to any of my images. I have nothing against that, but it's not part of my process personally. And one of the things that I really like about this one is that this flower in particular had these uh, darker tips of the on the ends of the petals, and I think that it works really well for this image. One of the things that I like about photographing flowers in black and white is that frequently the most charismatic thing about flowers, the first thing that we notice is the color. And it's hard to look past that in a lot of cases. And so when I make these images of flowers in black and white, it robs them completely of their most charismatic attribute. And you can see, I think you can see so much more of the form and construction of the flower. So the layers of the petals in this case. Next. I think this is the last one. This is at White Pocket in Arizona, northern Arizona, right on the border with you two, with Arizona and Utah. Um, and it's part of the Vermilion Cliffs National Monument. You might have heard of the Wave, which is a much more famous construction. It's accessible by the road, and you can drive right up to the Wave. And a lot of people have seen it. A lot of people have photographed it, and it's really great. But you need permits, and it's not easy to get permits for that. But White Pocket, on the other hand, is really hard to get to, and you don't need permits. And so this past April, early May, I went and made my way to White Pocket, and it's just a otherworldly experience. The geology, it's mostly eroded sandstone. There's a lot of conflicting opinions on how it all actually came to be, geologically speaking, but it's a completely otherworldly experience. And I like this one because there's just the one tree kind of framed by these two Martian looking hills, and the light casting a shadow in just a way to highlight that tree. So yeah, that's I think all I've got. So pass it to the next.
Okay, John Baccile, you here? You have to unmute yourself, John.
John is
Here you-
here.
Okay,
Okay,
you ready?
yes, I am. First of all, I want to apologize for being late. I just got laid off from my job, and I've kind of been expecting that. And I've been spending all day trying to get my job application done for a new. I was trying to focus on trying to get this interview right, and I think I did. But again, I do want to apologize for missing the beginning. I am glad I chose this theme though, because these pictures are from the place where I've worked off and on for the last 4 years. A little food and garden store in my new hometown of Galena, Maryland. and it's a family-run store, but there are, I'm one of the employees that aren't directly related, but in a way, we've kind of sort of become a family over the years. It's a pretty tight team, but they're closing for the season, and they've been cutting back my hours to the point I can't stay. I need a full-time job, and I have a few good options, but when they open back up in the spring, I'm not going to be able to. I'll probably have a better job, hopefully, anyway. So I don't really have much technical advice or analysis of these pictures. They are 5 of the women who work there. This woman is Hannah, and driving the forklift is her brother Nate. They are heirs to the Willie fortune and farming dynasty, and they have been pretty helpful this year with the store, more than I think they should have to be. The guy who owns it and sort of should be running it, kind of couldn't take it, and he kind of burned out, so he's had to fill in. But I guess I like to show that we have fun at work, and I like this job because you don't have to be serious all the time. It's as long as you can, be good to the customers and provide the best customer service you can. It's okay to have fun, I guess. Next, that woman's name is Sally. She fell down and broke her hip not too long ago, but she had been there for years. That's where she primarily works. She preps the bulk stuff. I think my mom's supposed to have lunch with her Thursday, but she's a wonderful addition to the team. Next, please. This is Courtney. She hasn't worked there in a little while, but I don't really have too much. I don't have too much to narrate about these. That's the thing. I sort of wanted them to speak for themselves. I can say that they're all taken with an iPhone. There is no Photoshop, just a little bit of editing within the default Photos app on the iPhone. Yeah, next, I guess. That's Rain. She helps with produce. She's a cashier sometimes. And I'm thinking I should have picked a different theme because there are more than 5 women, and I just happened to notice it shouldn't matter, but I picked all 5 white girls, and it's like let's see, right now it's mostly Latino women anymore, but I feel like I accidentally left them out and I didn't need to. So maybe later I will show a more comprehensive set of portraits. Is that it?
One more.
Oh yeah, good. The girl in the blue goes to University of Delaware, and this was actually her last day before she went back to school. And the woman on her right is with sunglasses is Marie. She's probably been there the longest. She has worked either for Cross Street or the parent store Willie Farms for almost 20 years now. She's sort of our general manager by default. But it was nice because that day, on Victoria's last day, we all wore blue shirts for University of Delaware to kind of show our support. That's really it. I just want to thank Steve and Eileen for putting this together. And again, I'm sorry, I completely forgot I was focused on trying to get this interview good and really talking about it.
We love your pictures, John, so I'm always happy.
Thank you.
All right, so let's move on to Will. You ready, Will? Make sure you unmute yourself. And
good evening, all. So Will Thompson, I've been a member of the Photographic Society, I think since 2018. I remember some in person. I did one of these in person.
Oh, Will, I'm sorry, I accidentally muted you. Could you unmute yourself again?
All right, I don't know what you missed. But anyway, Will Thompson, I'm from Manayunk. So I'm out. I take a lot of shots between Manayunk, Wissahickon Park, and Center City. I used to be downtown all the time. When Eileen had meetings in the past, I was able to dash over from the office after 5 o'clock and attend a 6:30, 7 o'clock meeting. So I do appreciate this format very much. So this first image is I call this brain fog, and this is really sort of completely unplanned. A lot of stuff I do is just very unplanned and spontaneous. And this was one instance where I really should have had a proper camera on me, but the I guess as the saying goes, the best camera you have that you have is the one that's on you. That's the one that's with you. In this case, was my cell phone, and and there's nothing wrong with that at all. I just wish I had the foresight to see the weather forecast for this one, because this fog and this image was a total gift of nature, and I feel like I didn't really screw it up and with my Android phone, but I just ended up taking a whole bunch of pictures of this scene. And I merged a few of them in post, and I must say I'm terrible at Photoshop. I'm all thumbs. My process is more organic than this, but I had to pull this together. I just needed something for a show, and when I encountered this scene, I was like, this is a total gift. And when I got back home, I was like, well, you can't just have trees and fog. It's not going to work. A judge isn't going to accept that. So I was like, well, let's see, what can I do? And so aside from the actual scene itself, the dodging and burning, just very minimal. The path that you see, just lightened that. It was there, but it needed a little bit more definition. Surprised by the dynamic range and a contrast that I was able to pull out of the cell phone, but then merging the two photos, I was able to get depth, as you see in towards the back where those trees become faint. So the figure in the foreground is actually that's my wife, and she actually wasn't with me on that walk. So that was a photo of her taken months before, not far away from this scene. And again, in my terrible Photoshop abysmal skills, I was like, well, I'm going to try to incorporate her in this scene to add a little bit of a story tell, and what's the figure, what is she doing there, kind of thing. So I was able to just kind of like capture that her with the ants going around her, trying to get a precise cut out and merge her with that image. And I was like, well, this just looks awful. It was just raggedy edges. And so when I saw that, I said, this isn't going to work. So I went in, and my whole Photoshop experience again is very random. So I was able to find a blur tool in there that actually was consistent with the fog, and I think it worked for that. So that's brain fog. I just felt like it needed an element of storytell, so that was it. And I was able to, get it off to the show that I was interested in. Next. All right, so this again kind of defies my style, sort of organic. I actually am from film, but I haven't done film in a long time. But uh, I I do appreciate the film simulations that are embedded in my cameras that I tend to gravitate towards. I took this original file with a Ricoh GR3 camera, which is a tiny little, almost credit card sized camera that takes phenomenal images. It's a crop sensor camera in this tiny little package, and I just had it in my jacket pocket last January, touring Font Hill Castle in Bucks County and Doylestown. Again, with my wife, we were just touring, so no plans for anything. And again, this is kind of spontaneous. I was on the tour and I kept on hanging back. I was last, and I just kept hanging back in the rooms while the tour went on. And I saw this hallway and I just felt, well, I was just drawn to its mood and creepiness, if you will. It was just the cracked door with the light bulb. That's one of those Edison light bulbs from back in the day. And I just really, and the original file out of the Rico is a lot darker, but I shot it in RAW. So I thought that was important. And I wasn't thinking, shows or judge or anything. I just need this for something, and I'll deal with it later. So the ghost that you see, again, it's adding an element of storytell and a little bit of mystery to something that otherwise the corridor itself wouldn't have made it past judges, in my opinion. So that the ghost is from an old family album on my wife's side, circa in the 1880s and 1890, a portrait. And I'm in Luminar at this point, Luminar Neo, another alternative to Photoshop. And I was able to find this function where I didn't have to do any cutouts at all. I was able to place that image behind the corridor and bring it forward. And then it just, all the background just fell away. And then I just adjusted the opacity. And beyond that, some dodging again with the steps that you see with the colored tiles. The window made for a really good sort of side Rembrandt light across the scene, and that all came out of the raw file. I just, I loved what happened as it sort of developed. Don't want to take too long here, but let me just see. I think that's good for that image. Next. All right, so this is a scene that you all know. And if we were not on mute, I'll ask you to guess which bridge that was from, but we can talk about it later. That was from South Street Bridge. Again, different camera. This is me dashing out of the office at lunchtime in January of, this is an older image, January of 2018. The last time the river was frozen over solid like that. So it was like, I just need to go, I just need to get that, even if it's a snapshot. But I made it a point to bring my camera, brought a compact camera. It was a Fujifilm X100T. Tiny thing. It was frigid. It was 10 degrees. It was brutally windy. And so from the South Street Bridge ledge, I was able to brace it on a tiny little tripod, had a trigger. And this is a long exposure. I have a huge interest in long exposure photography. And if you saw this scene, you'd be like, wow, that's impressive. But the clouds look flat, they look bland. And I thought this needed some long expo treatment to it. So I just started messing around with it. I knew the clouds were still not going to look like anything less than 45 seconds long. So I had an ND filter. It had I had a 10 stopper on, and the internal ND filter, I had a few more stops. So I darkened this scene a lot in camera, which I love doing in camera stuff more so than anything post-processing. Again, going back to film days, I love getting it right in camera. So I had complete control of the light, and I would say this went on for as long as I didn't get frostbitten, but I ended up being more like about a minute and 45 seconds long to create the motion in the clouds. Weren't getting any motion in the water, but what I saw was like the Schuylkill was full of cars, but the long exposure took care of that. So it made it kind of more desolate, and I thought that was more pleasing. And actually, I always saw this as a black and white image. The color's fine, but the black and white brought out the drama and the grit, I felt, and did it justice. It's probably one of my better images Just as far as, appeal if somebody's at the house or if it's on a wall or something. So, I, you know, I can keep looking at it and hope that it strikes you the same. And it's an old skyline because you can see the Comcast Center is not completed. So, next, um, so I'll try to be quicker. I know. So I titled this Urban Obscura. I got a lot of, where's that? Is that in New York? Is that in, no, it's actually just a drizzly day last November outside of my office on a coffee break. And I was fortunate to have my Ricoh GR3 that day, which it's just like, it's awesome. It's like there's no excuse not to be anywhere with the camera. So that was on me, and I was like, well, things aligned because the wetness of the sidewalk, the dreariness of the sky, it all just kind of aligned, similar to that other photo with the fog. I was like, well, I'm just going to take something of this. I'm going to take a bunch of them before it clears up and the sidewalks dry out. So this is an ICM shot, intentional camera movement, if you will. This sort of the trendy way to call it like it's just a panning shot. It's a vertical panning shot with a slow shutter. So ever since I took my first few test shots in early 2022 with the ICM where you're moving the camera around different ways, I was hooked, and I was out the other day again in Wissahickon Park, just taking backdrops for, future. So, again, this is all manual in-camera settings, an ND3 filter to darken things. I would say this is between 1/4 and 1/8 of a second shutter, at the base 200 ISO for that camera, with vertical, steady, slow sweeping motion through the scene as the shutters capturing the buildings. So again, gave me some drama, gave me the detail, the sort of the blurred detail and the obscurity that I wanted to have. Otherwise, you could take a picture of that same thing, that City Hall in the background, this Billy Penn. But again, you'd be taking a postcard shot, and I was looking to do something with this. I will say I needed something in the foreground, and there was really nobody around. It was just dreary. So that was basically the figure that you see is not real. It's a brush. It's a Photoshop brush, and I used the smudge tool to be consistent with the buildings, and the birds aren't real either. So just wanted to make it look a little more ominous, and then just did just a smidge on the sky with the slider. I didn't want to oversaturate it, but the sky was kind of golden, little bit of sunset coming with the rain, and just was there at the right time. So I think next, last one. All right, I called this Walking Out of a Dream. This is also Wissahickon Park. Again, Philadelphia. If people say, where was this? Like, were you at Ricketts Glen or something? No, I was up the street from where I live in Philadelphia. And it was, again, I needed something for a show. I just needed a keeper, and I wasn't confident in it. And I went up, took a bunch of backdrops. The lighting was terrible. It was awful.
Right.
And again, I used a 3 to 6 stop filter, stopped down to about f16 and sweeping upward motion. And that's pretty much it. Did you want to take it away, Steve? Because I don't want to take up too much time.
All right, so I'll continue. So-
Okay.
So my wife and I went to London a little under a year ago, And so I figured I'd show you some, these are pictures that would probably be able to make the travel brochure. So these are the shots I took in London. I had a fun time. Typical tourist, with a camera, took too many pictures and culled it down. But so what you're looking at is the famous bridge you always see when you think of London. This is not London Bridge. This is Tower Bridge. I was probably standing on London Bridge when I took this picture of Tower Bridge. So London Bridge is not a very exciting looking bridge. It's just a bridge. It looks like one of the ones that might cross the Schuylkill River. But Tower Bridge is the fancy one with all this, and that's the one you always see pictures of. And it's interesting because Tower Bridge is right next to the Tower of London, but I believe it's called Tower Bridge because of the uprights and not because it's next to the Tower of London. Of course, your trip to London would not be complete if you didn't see Parliament. So this is the Parliament building. I always felt like it looked like it was made like we make the sand castles, the drip castles at the beach. And of course, the big bus company, that's the hop on, hop off bus. They're constantly going by. So this is Parliament. Now, one of the things that people talk about is the food in London. They say the food in London isn't good. Well, I got news for you. We ate great food in London. In fact, against my wife's permission, I had fish and chips 3 times. And if I tell you the name of the restaurant, you'll understand why the best fish and chips was at the one called Gordon Ramsay's Street Walk. And the Gordon Ramsay part should be the part that gets you. But this was a indoor, think of Reading Terminal Market on steroids. This place was phenomenal. So this was brownies had there. We did not try those brownies. And of course, a day trip. You have to take a day trip. You have to go to Windsor Castle. So this is Windsor Castle. Yes, they're real castles. We don't have real castles here in the United States like this, but this is Windsor Castle. And you can see how big it is. You can see people and how big the building is. And inside was just amazing inside. So now we get to my last picture, which is the London Eye. This is a relatively new, and you can look and you can see Parliament, which is the four-sided, like rectangular looking tower. And then you see the one with the clock. Well, the clock is Big Ben, but the tower is called Elizabeth Tower. So to give you how big this Ferris wheel is, each one of those pods holds about 30 people. And there's about 30, I can't remember the exact numbers, about 30 pods. And the thing goes so slowly that if you're not really paying attention, you can't see it moving. I mean, you have to watch and sort of kind of like put your finger here and sort of, it doesn't move very fast, but it's constantly going around. And when it hits the bottom, there's enough room where people actually scurry off one way and then they push people, not push, but they have people enter the other side. And it's constantly being refilled. And the line to get in this thing was very long. So my wife and I says, we're not standing in line. Now, if you look at the bottom right, you'll see looks like wires coming down. That's actually the truss holding up what they call Millennial Bridge. There's a lot of bridges. The one that's closest to the Parliament is crowded. And of course, that's the one where you're going to find all the 3 balls and the 3 cups in 1 ball, and you got to play the game, where they scam you. So that is that. Now, is Mike Silverman here now? He's our last. Now, Mike did warn me he was going to be late.
Can you hear me okay, Steve?
Yep. Perfect. You ready for the first slide?
Sure. So in the year 2020, I've curated about 50 images during the year, and I'm just going to share a handful with you today, and perhaps at a later time, I can get you the full treatment. But 2020 we think of as the year of the pandemic, but there actually was a lot of other stuff going on that year. including the racial justice protests and an election. So I'm going to go through a number of photos, and I'll give you the dates, and you get an idea of what's happening. This photograph was taken in the first week of January. And this is a group of kind of older men and women. They kind of remind me of like leftover hippies from the 1960s. And they were here protesting on Walnut Street against the wars in Iraq and Iran. There would be many other protests in 2020, but on different subjects. Next. This photo was taken on March the 14th, and this was taken in Chinatown. A woman riding her bike, coming in from doing a lot of shopping, and she's wearing a mask. And if if you think about it, most people were not wearing masks in March, at least not outside of Chinatown. So this was sort of an early preview of what would become commonplace all over the city. Next. This photo was taken in April 21st. The lockdown had started by this point. You could not dine in restaurants. They were all, closed for inside dining. And in order to make ends meet, restaurants had to find a way to sustain themselves. And this restaurant, a small little Mexican restaurant in Callow Hill, they fashioned a window that maybe they never opened before into a takeout window. And by the way, all these photos that you'll see were taken inside Philadelphia in 2020. Next, please, Steve. This photo was taken on June the 6th. This was about a week after the George Floyd murder and the riots that quickly followed. And the National Guard was called into Philadelphia. You see them in the very back of the photograph there. And then in front of them, you see the police. And the person at the microphone is a clergyman who is there kind of telling the crowd that has assembled, take it easy. He was trying to be a peacemaker there. And the crowd, was not angry, and I think in large part because of this clergyman telling people to take it easy. Next, please. This is the front of the Apple store on Walnut Street, taken on June the 20th. If you remember, right after the George Floyd, the riots following the George Floyd event, many stores in Philadelphia closed, many of them boarded up. And this is about 3 weeks later. The Apple store had reopened, by this point, but the front of the store was boarded up, and some artwork, was put on the front, and supporting Black Lives Matter, etc. Next, please, Steve. This is a photograph taken in late August. So this is not quite 3 months after George Floyd was murdered. And this scene on South Street shows just a few pieces of plywood propped up in front of a store, featuring a very lifelike portrait of George Floyd. Next, please. This photo is taken in September, the middle of September. And at this point in the year 2020, they were sort of transitioning from the racial, the racial justice protests to the political protests, because the election, was only a couple months away from here. And if you see this photograph, the woman is saying something to the crowd, and there is a mixture of, something about the president, but also a lot of the, Black Lives Matter kind of sentiment as well. And I think this was taken, I'm not sure where this was taken. It was either maybe Rittenhouse or Eakins Oval. I'm not really sure. Next, please. This photo is taken on Market Street on November the 7th. This is a Saturday. So if you remember, we had the election on a Tuesday, but we didn't know who was elected president until the vote was finalized or nearly finalized in Philadelphia. And that was not announced until Saturday morning, the Saturday morning following the Tuesday election. And the vote margin in Philadelphia was enough to show that Pennsylvania was won by Biden, and the city sort of erupted in this, happiness. And all throughout the city that day, from Independence Mall to, well, it was all over. But here, you saw this crowd just sort of assemble and take over the street and celebrate the victory there. And I just love this. I just love the sign in the middle there. Voting is my superpower, and that's just such a nice sentiment. And the last photo, please, Steve. So this is a photo taken outside the City Tavern. And this is a very lifelike looking wooden cutout of a patriot. And someone had come along and put a mask on them because we were still very much, in the midst of the pandemic. And City Tavern, which closed in like April of that year because of the pandemic, would never reopen. And it's been closed ever since that time. So I thought this was kind of a nice remembrance of the City Tavern in the year 2020. So that concludes my photos, and thank you very much.
Okay, so we've now seen all the pictures, so we're open to discussion. And unmute yourself if you want to talk. You can either talk about and ask questions about any of the pictures you saw, or anything about the presentation I gave about the beginning about the future of the Photo Society. So the floor is now open. It's your chance to have your voice heard. And so.
Hey, I have a question for Steve and a question for Will. For Steve, how many days did you have to spend in London to get a picture of those landmarks under sunshine?
Well, we were in
They look really
London
they
2
look
weeks.
familiar. I was like, well, something's off about those. I've never seen them photographed in daylight. Just cloudy or something.
So we were there for 2 weeks. So we decided rather than just spend 2 days and do a lot of cities, we've been traveling a lot recently. And so our goal is to go to a city and spend a lot of time. And we walked everywhere in London. So this is just a tip of the iceberg of photos I took in London.
Or I'd like to see more of them sometime if you don't mind, if you have the time.
Well, one of these days I'll probably get a chance to do a presentation of 1 or 2 of my cities, because I was recently in Paris too.
Well, yeah, you go on that. Thank you. My question for Michael is with your picture of the Philly skyline, the long exposure black and white one, you said you captured it on color film?
It was digital. So
Okay,
the original file was digital, and when I was out there, again, it was freezing cold, so I was like, well, let me just get the shot. And I got every element that you see as far as the streaky clouds and the vanishing cars and any people, which the long exposure automatically does, with the time lapse. And then I was just like, this needs to be black and white. And when I got home, I was just like, wow, this is great.
it is.
It brought out the drama.
My question was specifically about the black and white treatment. Did you just do desaturation across the board and up the contrast, or do you play with the individual color levels?
So within something like Lightroom, there's several. There's the Adobe default, but then there's several profiles that some of the black and white conversions are flatter than others, and I just went for one that just had a little bit more. Uh, it allowed me to play with the dynamic range of the shot more because there were some whites in the sky and there were some darks around the riverbed. And so I just went with something that wasn't so bland and flat. It actually helped to bring out the contrast. It was a contrastier profile. And from there, I was able to apply some, minimal dodging, mainly dodging to lighten. Yeah.
Thank you
Uh,
very much.
Hi, this is May. I have a question for Will, if that's okay.
mhm.
Sure thing.
Okay, you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I really like the one photo that near the city hall on the rainy day. I know that you added the person and in the as a brush you mentioned. You have mentioned that you used 1/8 of a second or a quarter of a second and 200 ISO ICM. Did you do it in one shot?
So I'm not very good at layers at all. And I never approached photography that way. I know that's the way post-processing in modern times is set up with merging layers. So when I see that scene, yeah, it looks flat, but it has elements of like with the rain, the definition and the wetness of the sidewalk. I was able to sweep up with and I the first one's never great. It's just because of my experience at doing it, my starting point might be I might default it at 1/8 of a second. And when I have people in the scene, if you go a quarter to an eighth, sometimes you get like people that are too stretched out and too obscure. But I didn't have any people in this scene, so yeah, it was a matter of just experimenting within the range that I know, and in my mind's eye, I know how that's going to come out. So I'm constantly taking pictures with backdrops in mind. And sometimes it's trees, clouds, water, buildings, and they look like nothing, and they can't hold their own as a standalone image in some cases. But I just know that I can, if I put that in my inventory, I can, go back to it. But yeah, it's that slow of a shutter with movement up through the frame like that.
Yeah, yeah, it's really good. I really like the ICM, but I never tried it myself. Like, a lot of people do it in many multiple layers in the Photoshop. I haven't learned that yet, but I thought, wow, that is amazing.
It
So,
just adds, yeah, it just adds some interest to long exposure. It's almost like a different sport within long exposure photography, if you will, because I could take long exposures of like moving clouds and water off of a tripod all day long. I love it. But when I kind of discovered this, I was like, well, it's just like panning in the film days, but you get to screw up a lot more with digital because you come home with a card full of duds, and
Yes.
but the duds get less and less as you experiment within that slow shutter range of, it could be anywhere from a quarter, half to a 20th of a second, depending on what you're taking.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. You inspired me.
You're welcome. I have a question for Ryan. So Ryan, you were saying that you're doing all of your photography only with film. And do you use, is your Hasselblad medium format? And if so, how many shots do you get out of a roll?
Yeah, so it's all film for me. That is what I find interesting, and so that's what I pursue. But yes, it is all Hasselblad, so medium format. It's 6x6, so 12 shots on a roll of 120 film.
Yeah, so I guess you got to be pretty selective with what you're taking to conserve film. I guess film costs and things. But you said you process your own, because I was interested in getting back into film medium format and looking at different 6x7, 6x9, type format. Do those files, because they take 120 film takes in so much information, what does that equate to when you scan it digitally? Are they massive files?
There's a lot of different ways to scan it, and so that depends on the resolution of your scanner that you have available. The best way to scan film is probably via to wet mount it and drum scan it. That's not that's cost and time prohibitive for me, so I use a 60 megapixel digital camera on a copy stand, and the film is held in front of a light source, and so I get a square image out of a 60 megapixel file. So a lot of the times when I process it through Lightroom, they're about 30 megabytes.
Yeah, so they're relatively big, but consistent with like digital cameras today, I guess, coming out of
Yeah, my preference is not to even bring these into Lightroom in the first place. My preference is to print these in the darkroom, and that's not a comparable thing at all. And also much harder to show on a Zoom call.
I would say no, but I like the dodging and burning that I'm talking about doing in post. It's all foreign to me still, because I grew up with the whole darkroom set up in my basement as a kid, and I remember the enlarger, and you're dodging and just controlling the light. So that's very admirable, and I would definitely like to see a tutorial of yours on that sometime.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So did anybody want to comment on the original presentation? And we threw out some ideas that they did or didn't like for what's happening in the future of the Photo Society?
I want to comment on the joint Zoom and in-person meetings. I belong to two different organizations that have struggled and finally got the right equipment to make it work, because there's so many different feedbacks of sound that you get with a joint meeting, some on cell phones, some in person, and it just gets to be very chaotic unless you have the right equipment to pick up the sound in the right way. So you can talk to somebody who knows how to do it. but we found we finally had to go to somebody who really knew what to do.
All right, well, thank you for that. That's helpful, very helpful.
I'd say that as a new member, I'm excited for the growth and new opportunities of the organization, and I don't think that they all have to be merged, and I don't think that everybody has to go to every meeting. I think you can have Zoom meetings and you can have in-person meetings, and sometimes people can come to one and not the other. So I think both can be pursued independently and concurrently.
Excellent feedback. Thank you.
I also, I heard some questions about using Photoshop and maybe just having a workshop where we talk about some of the software that's become available, and maybe even touch just a little bit on the AI things that are sort of happening. So
And that's definitely something we're talking about doing.
something really funny happened. I said AI, and all of a sudden, Alexa has started to give me a full course on what AI is about from across the room.
So AI is supposedly the opposite of national stupidity. All right, well, if anybody wants to speak, now's your chance. Otherwise, I think we're gonna wrap up this meeting.
Well, hey, I just wanted to thank you, Steve, for putting this together and moderating so well for this meeting. And thank Eileen for, sharing that responsibility, but she's normally the one that, you know, moderates these meetings. And then we have 5 really good photographers with some extraordinary photography here, and very different, each one of them. So this is, I'd love to see a whole presentation by each one of them somewhere along the line, and any subject they want to talk about. And, just to go back over the fact that, there's a whole bunch of us trying to help Eileen out here. In trying to help Eileen out, we've sort of come to realize how much she's been doing for the last 20 years, because it's wearing like, the 3 or 4 of us out just to do what she used to do by herself. Trying to put these meetings together, and then the October show, dealing with the Plastic Club, kind of keeping track of like who's in the organization and where everybody is as far as dues are concerned, and little kind of sort of even dumb housekeeping stuff like that. It takes a lot. So we owe Eileen an awful lot for all the work that she's been doing. Just wanted to mention that. It's not as if, we're doing anything that great. She's been doing.
But it's the members. The Photographic Society would have died. It was 25 years ago when I joined. It was at the Packard Motor Car Building at Broad and Reese. There were incredible presentations, and maybe 5 people showed up at a meeting, although there were lots of members, but not very many people showed up. We lost that facility and we moved to the Plastic Club. The Plastic Club at that time really was very welcoming. They needed extra people. They needed extra financial help. It was great. We moved in there, and then all of a sudden, these members, the members of the Photographic Society, started showing up at meetings and then showing up for the October show. And so if you're trying to do something for an organization and no one shows up, then what are you doing? But when people start showing up, the energy the energy is enormous. And that is what kept me going and just keeping the Photographic Society active and alive. COVID kind of, made things a little bit more difficult, but good. But then going to Zoom, if you go to YouTube and you look at the 32, Eileen, don't lie, 32, the 32 presentations and the subject matter from those 1 hour presentations, it's amazing. And it's the people that did those presentations, and it's the people that tuned into Zoom, and it's the people that paid their dues that have kept the Photographic Society alive. I just kind of push the buttons, but it's the members that really made it stay alive. And I'm hoping that now, as we can start to branch out into other activities once again, that it will be the members. It will be the members that keep the Photographic Society alive. And if just get in touch with one of us. Oh, John, get in touch with one of us if you're interested in giving a presentation, because the presentations are amazing and they're so helpful, and the subject matter is just amazing. And the presentations that we saw tonight, just a few images, but you get inspired. And that's been my goal. So just thank you. That was a great big thank you. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wanted to say thank you so much for accepting me as a new member, and really I'm very happy that I finally joined, because I've wanted to join for quite some time, and all the presentations today were fascinating and inspiring, and I would love to be a part of the volunteering group and help in a way I can to keep it going.
Glad to hear that.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording. I'll keep the meeting open for